The dawn light filtered through the slats of the coop like pale interrogation beams, catching dust motes that danced in the stillness. Cluck sat hunched over a scrap of burlap stretched across a wooden crate, his beak working furiously to stitch together fragmented cipher patches using nothing but a length of braided hemp and sheer willpower. The air smelled of damp straw and impending urgency. For weeks he had operated in the shadows, a professional arranging scenery for others' downfalls, but the evidence recovered from the proxy warehouse had shifted the gravity of his orbit. He was no longer merely cleaning up the farm's mess, he was hunting the architects of it. Winston trotted into the center of the coop, his snout wet and determined, dragging a crumpled agricultural ledger across the straw. The pig stopped abruptly, his eyes narrowing as he exhaled a plume of steam. He had spent the night cross-referencing intercepted supply manifests with known black market routing protocols. With a grunt of triumph, Winston nudged a specific entry toward Cluck. The fragmented agri-shell code, previously unintelligible, now resolved into a clear directive pointing directly to the gilded grain. It was not merely a supplier. The financial routing indicated it served as a front for neural harvesting data transfers. The conspiracy had teeth, and they were sharpening themselves in the dark corners of international agriculture. Cluck studied the ledger, his internal monologue running cold and precise. The current cipher patching work was insufficient. A patchwork code could reveal destinations, but it could not authenticate the clearance levels required to verify the neural harvesting links without triggering alarms that would burn every bridge he had left. He needed physical terminal access to cross-reference the supply manifests with the roost's internal ledger. Without it, they were flying blind through a minefield of encrypted lies. Henrietta stepped out from behind the nesting boxes, her feathers perfectly preened despite the preceding night's skirmish. She did not cluck. She projected authority with every step, her gaze steady and unyielding. The rivalry that once defined their existence had been burned away by irrigation water and shared danger, leaving something far more valuable in its wake. She approached Cluck, lowering her head slightly in a gesture of formal recognition. "The coop is secure, but the world outside is not," she intoned, her voice carrying the weight of a seasoned operative. "I know the blind spots in the perimeter security better than any human watchdog. I can provide access to the ventilation shafts and the unmonitored feed stores. In exchange, I demand shared operational authority over all field missions. We do this together, or we do not do it at all." Cluck regarded her for a long moment, the silence stretching taut. The partnership was logical, necessary, and undeniable. He gave a single, sharp nod, his posture straightening with renewed resolve. The alliance was no longer merely implicit, it was cemented in tactical reality. They were co-conspirators now, bound by mutual interest and unspoken trust. Before Cluck could formulate the next phase of their infiltration strategy, the heavy wooden door of the coop swung open with a violent bang. Morning light flooded the interior, blindingly bright and utterly unwelcome. The farmer stood in the doorway, holding a clipboard and radiating the frantic energy of a man who had just discovered a scheduling conflict. "Right then, poultry show preparations start immediately," the farmer announced, his voice booming like a foghorn. "We need to clear the yard. Bring in all the bright ribbons, temporary fencing, and disoriented livestock from the north pasture. Cluck, you're up for feather polishing duty before we even get started." The coop erupted into chaotic motion. Bright ribbons were thrown through the air like colorful confetti at a funeral, tangling around rafters and perches. Temporary fencing clattered against the walls, creating a labyrinth of metal and wire that fractured their operational sightlines. Disoriented livestock bleated and lowed as they were herded past the coop windows, casting long, distracting shadows across Cluck's work area. The logistical friction was immediate and overwhelming. Cluck watched the ribbons settle over his cipher patches, the hemp threads now hopelessly entangled with synthetic polyester. His careful preparations were being dismantled by mundane bureaucracy in real time. Henrietta remained calm, her eyes tracking the farmer's movements with analytical precision. The objective had been established, the partnership cemented, but the farm itself had become the first obstacle on their path to exposing the conspiracy. Cluck adjusted his stance, preparing to navigate the chaos without losing focus. The game was afoot, and the board was suddenly very crowded. The dawn light filtered through the coop slats, casting long geometric shadows across the wooden floor where Cluck and Henrietta hunched over a topographical sketch scratched into a discarded feed sack. They were no longer merely cohabitants sharing a nesting cavity. They were tactical partners with shared command authority, and the weight of that arrangement settled comfortably on his comb. The target was the Gilded Grain, a high-end restaurant masquerading as a culinary institution while secretly routing neural harvesting data through its kitchen terminals. Cluck tapped a claw against a meticulously drawn floor plan. The service entrance led to a loading bay, but the primary ventilation shaft sat 3 meters past the dry storage aisle. It aligned perfectly with the jagged, rhythmic patterns of destruction Gerald had recently inflicted on the coop's eastern support beams. Every gnawed timber corresponded to a load-bearing weak point that could be exploited for silent structural navigation. Gerald himself lay nearby, blissfully unaware that his afternoon chewing habits had just become the cornerstone of an elite infiltration strategy. He was currently dismantling a burlap sack with the focused enthusiasm of a demolition expert, leaving a trail of fibrous debris that Cluck mentally mapped onto the restaurant's blueprints. A distant tractor horn blared from the yard, reminding them that the farmers' poultry show preparations were accelerating, but operational tempo took precedence over agricultural pageantry. Henrietta adjusted her posture, her keen eyes scanning the assembly of discarded poultry show ribbons and repurposed equipment scattered across the hay. She had spent the last hour engineering a tactical disguise that would bypass modern kitchen staff protocols with surgical precision. A modified feed bucket visor, carefully trimmed to frame her facial structure without obstructing peripheral vision, sat beside a cascade of crimson and silver rosettes salvaged from last season's county fair circuit. The ribbons were woven into her plumage using a technique that mimicked official exhibition standards, complete with a laminated tag bearing a forged registration number. To the untrained eye, she would appear as a registered heritage breed undergoing transport inspection. Kitchen security systems relied on automated counters and human bias. Neither anticipated a show hen walking through a staff door while wearing the proper accoutrements of agricultural bureaucracy. She stepped back, assessing the silhouette. The disguise was flawless. It granted her access to the service corridors where culinary logistics were managed, effectively turning a livestock registry into a master key. Her status shifted seamlessly from observer to co-leader, her tactical gear secured and ready for deployment. A low grunt echoed from the corner where Winston paced beside a tangle of exposed wiring and salvaged electronics. The pig had never been one for idle speculation, and his paranoia had finally yielded to operational necessity. He nudged a frayed Ethernet cable toward Cluck with a determined snout. This was Gerald's chewed modem tether, stripped and rewired using Winston's impromptu circuitry. With a series of precise clicks from a salvaged router module, he established a dead-drop channel routing through the restaurant's public Wi-Fi network. The connection flickered to life, blinking in steady synchronization with Winston's decryption algorithms. Real-time manifest decryption was now active, feeding encrypted supply data directly into their local cache. Every packet of information intercepted by the compromised node would be parsed, translated, and cross-referenced against agri-shell routing codes without leaving the coop. The digital bridge was complete, turning ordinary broadband traffic into a tactical lifeline that hummed with quiet reliability. Cluck turned his attention inward, calibrating his neuromuscular response to the mission parameters. He began rehearsing the infiltration path, pacing the exact stride length required to navigate narrow ductwork without triggering acoustic alarms. Each step was measured, each wing adjustment calculated for silent leverage, yet the environment conspired against his discipline. A cracked kernel of wheat had rolled beneath a loose floorboard, catching the morning sun with an iridescent sheen. His pupils dilated, his head twitched. The ancient imperative to peck flared in his hindbrain, a biological reflex screaming at him to interrupt the tactical drill and satisfy a trivial hunger. He forced his neck muscles to lock, deploying decades of disciplined restraint over primordial instinct. True professionals do not chase crumbs when the objective demands precision. He ground the impulse down, replacing it with cold analytical focus. He ran the sequence again, adjusting his center of gravity to account for the friction coefficient of polished tile versus rough concrete. The mental simulation was flawless, but execution required absolute suppression of every autonomic trigger. When the hypothetical dining room grain bins materialized in his tactical visualization, he locked his talons and steadied his breathing, treating the phantom kernels with the same detached indifference as a loaded firearm. The path was mapped. The disguise was deployed. The data channel was live. All that remained was the physical breach, and Cluck stood ready to step into the shadows of the service corridor. The dawn light bled through the Coop slats as Cluck adjusted his harness, the weight of the decrypted manifests heavy against his breast feathers. Henrietta stood opposite him, her tactical disguise impeccably arranged. A modified feed bucket visor sat low over her eyes, and discarded poultry show ribbons had been woven into a camouflage mantle that served double duty as signal flare cord. Their partnership was no longer an unspoken understanding, but a formalized command structure, cemented in the quiet hours while Winston decoded supply manifests and the carrier pigeon network hummed with restored manual relay efficiency. The goal had shifted. Verification required terminal access at the Gilded Grain. Cluck launched himself into the service corridor beyond the Coop, navigating the familiar damp tunnels that fed directly into the restaurant substructure. The ventilation system was a labyrinth of galvanized steel and thermal sensors. He moved with calculated precision, his wings tucked tight against the draft. His internal log filed the atmospheric composition as hostile. Externally, he was simply a rooster navigating a drafty service tunnel. Grease traps yawned beneath the grating like silent predators, but Cluck's balance held firm. Every step was a calculation of weight distribution and acoustic dampening. Above him, through the ventilation shafts, the restaurant kitchen roared to life. Henrietta remained at her post. From a hidden Coop nest equipped with synchronized relay boxes, she monitored the digital floor plans transmitted via the manual pigeon network. Her talons tapped against the wooden planks, cross-referencing supply truck arrival times with the restaurant's service corridors. The data streams aligned perfectly. Extraction would occur through the primary loading dock, provided logistics held. They did not hold. Heavy tires crunched on gravel outside. The loading bay doors groaned open to reveal the farmer, his face flushed with pre-dawn enthusiasm and a clipboard clutched like a shield. He had forgotten nothing about the upcoming county poultry show. With practiced authority, he herded 3 prize-winning bantams through the bay, their iridescent feathers catching the harsh fluorescent light. Cluck froze mid-rail. The primary extraction route was now occupied by avian royalty and a very determined agricultural inspector. The farmer whistled sharply, directing the birds toward a staging area that completely sealed off the dock's service gate. Cluck's composure cooled into tactical ice. Obstruction noted. Pivot required. He abandoned the loading dock approach and dropped to a lower service corridor. A dumbwaiter shaft stood adjacent to the pass-through counter, its rusted pulley system groaning with age. He hopped onto the carriage, triggered the manual release lever with his beak, and descended into chaos. The mechanism shuddered, misaligned gears grinding before the car lurched free, swinging wildly on a frayed cable before snapping upright just as it cleared the kitchen threshold. Before Cluck could assess the situation, a catering trolley bearing 3 tiers of unbaked soufflé detached from its brake and careened toward him. He stepped aside at the last possible second. The runaway trolley clipped a support column, gained momentum, and smashed directly into the wall behind the head chef's observation station. Glass shattered. Monitors flickered. Surveillance feeds scrambled in a cascade of digital static, granting Cluck unobserved passage through the service corridors. Simultaneously, Henrietta moved. Utilizing her tactical disguise to blend with the kitchen's linen supply, she intercepted a rival courier attempting to slip neural harvesting data drives into a crate of legitimate heirloom tomatoes. The exchange was swift and silent. Her talons found the courier's wrist. A pressure point strike rendered him compliant without raising his voice. But the maneuver activated a concealed pressure plate beneath the service corridor flooring. Red lights pulsed behind the drywall. A silent alarm triggered, its high-frequency hum vibrating through the floorboards. Cluck stood at the intersection of two dead ends. The loading dock remained blocked by prize-winning bantams and agricultural protocol. The primary extraction route was compromised. Across the corridor, the service stairwell door bore the fresh glow of an active security lock. Henrietta's interception had succeeded tactically but failed strategically. The alarm's frequency escalated into a localized strobe effect. They were pinned. Cluck's discipline held. He calculated the structural load-bearing walls, the thermal output of the induction stoves, and the blind spots in the remaining camera array. The pivot was no longer about extraction. It was about reconfiguration. He tapped a rhythm against the dumbwaiter shaft, signaling Henrietta to hold position while he mapped an alternate trajectory through the HVAC maintenance ducts. The conspiracy link still waited at the terminal. The path had simply grown more complicated. The silence alarm did not beep. It hummed, a subsonic thrum vibrating through the corrugated steel floor and up Cluck's talons. He stood at attention in the center of the cold storage walk-in, his feathers flaring against the rapidly plummeting temperature. The heavy service doors slammed shut behind him with the finality of a guillotine blade. Through the small reinforced porthole, he could see chaos erupting in the loading dock, but it was too late. The lockdown protocol had engaged, sealing every exit and trapping him in a freezing metal box designed for bulk butter, not professional assassins. The cold bit into his shanks. His internal wiring screamed a single directive: roost, find the warmest corner, curl into a tight ball of down and sleep until dawn. The compost bin in the far shadow radiated a faint, promising heat. Every instinct honed by 12 episodes of rural existence demanded he abandon his mission and prioritize thermoregulation. Cluck narrowed his eyes. He was not merely a chicken, he was the bantam. And the bantam did not roost when the tea was still steeping. He shifted his weight to one talon, pecking at the rusted ventilation grate embedded in the ceiling. It was old, stubborn, and coated in decades of grease. Hooking his beak under the lip, he pulled until his muscles strained. Nothing happened. The metal groaned but held fast. Through the carrier pigeon network, Henrietta's tactical updates arrived with mechanical precision. Her manual relay system was routing encrypted data streams through the restaurant's ceiling rafters. A fresh courier bird swooped into the shaft near Cluck's head, dropping a microcapsule from its leg harness. Cluck caught it midair, swallowing it to digest the cipher later. Henrietta's voice echoed in his mind via their shared command authority. The rival courier's swap had been deliberate. They knew we had the manifests. This is an isolation trap. Cluck understood immediately. The cold storage was not a mistake. It was a pressure cooker designed to force him to surrender the encrypted supply manifests by physical discomfort alone, or wait for the temperature to drop low enough that his motor functions would fail completely. He could feel his claws losing their grip on the smooth steel floor. He had to crank the grate open. It required sustained torque, not just a peck. Cluck adjusted his stance, gripping the rusted bars with both talons and twisting his body like a propeller. His wing feathers ruffled in frustration as the metal resisted. He needed coordination. Cluck clucked sharply, a percussive command that vibrated through the air ducts. I need a distraction. The electronic lock on my door is biometrically sealed. I cannot force it without power cycling the local junction. The answer came back almost instantly via another swooping courier. Pantry adjacent. Flour sacks are overloaded, triggering controlled collapse in 3, 2, 1. Cluck braced himself against the ceiling joists and threw his entire body weight into twisting the grate. The rust screamed, metal sheared. With a violent shudder, the grate gave way, swinging outward on its corroded hinges. Simultaneously, A muffled explosion echoed through the walls as Henrietta executed her maneuver. The restaurant groaned as tons of premium grain flour cascaded through the ceiling panels in the adjacent pantry. The resulting short circuit fried the junction box controlling the cold storage door. Its magnetic seal dissolved into harmless sparks. Cluck did not wait to admire his work. He dropped from the ceiling, landing silently on the steel floor just as the heavy service doors hissed open. Flour dusted every surface like fresh snow, coating the stunned staff in a ghostly white layer. The rival courier, caught off guard by the diversion, slipped on a slick patch of grain and tumbled into a stack of empty ice crates. Cluck moved with predatory grace, scrambling up the service corridor wall past grease traps and thermal sensors. The path to the secure terminal was clear. Reaching the ventilation shaft toward the server room, Cluck paused only to adjust his wing cuffs. The temperature outside was rising rapidly, but he felt no warmth in his chest. Only the cold certainty of a mission interrupted, not defeated. He pecked at a loose panel, revealing the dark corridor ahead. Coordinates confirmed via the vent. Server room is 3 meters forward. The terminal is unguarded. Cluck nodded, his beak clicking softly. Stepping into the shadows, he left the chaos of the diversion behind him. The conspiracy would not win tonight, not while he had a beak, a plan, and a hen who knew how to collapse a room of flour with surgical precision. The heavy steel door of the cold storage groaned as Cluck pushed past the frost-rimed threshold. The kitchen lockdown had sealed every service exit, but the gilded grain's architectural arrogance worked in his favor. High ceilings, redundant infrastructure, and a distinct lack of avian security protocols. He moved through the dimly lit utility corridor, feathers pressed flat against his body to maintain aerodynamic silence. Inside his modified feedsack coat, the farm-grade grounding wire from Gerald's shredded chew toy rested heavy and cool. A professional never leaves home without the right tools, even if those tools were originally designed for a goat with a severe dental emergency. The wire hummed faintly against his ribs, a tangible reminder that chaos could be harnessed into precision. The private server room waited behind a biometric scanner that gleamed like a watchful eye. Cluck did not hesitate. He extended his wing, hooked the grounding wire from his coat pocket, and tapped it against the exposed secondary relay panel beside the door. Sparks fizzled harmlessly as the electromagnetic pulse shorted the authentication loop. The lock clicked with a sound of surrender. Inside, rows of humming servers cast a cold blue glow across empty workstations. This was the nerve center, hidden behind drywall and expensive carpeting. He approached the primary terminal, his posture rigid, his gaze analytical. Professionals arrange the scenery, they do not rely on luck. The blue light reflected in his beady eyes, sharp and unblinking. Henrietta's voice crackled through his concealed earpiece, clear and steady despite the distance from the Coop nest. She wore her tactical disguise perfectly, the poultry show ribbons woven into the visor of her modified feed bucket, giving her the appearance of an overly serious kitchen manager. Through the restaurant's internal comms loop, she accessed the terminal interface. Winston's latest cipher patch loaded instantly, its algorithmic precision mapping onto the restaurant's legacy code like a key finding its lock. She worked rapidly, cross-referencing the neural harvesting data streams against AgriShell's supply chain manifests. Lines of encrypted logistics scrolled across her monitor, each entry a thread in a tangled web that was quickly unraveling. The system complied without resistance. The terminal confirmed what they had already suspected but needed to verify. The manipulator within the roost was not merely orchestrating from the shadows, he was funding them. Transaction histories unspooled across the screen, routing agricultural subsidies through shell corporations and directly into covert neural harvesting accounts. The financial trail was irrefutable, a paper trail of greed that stretched from Muddington Acres to every corner of the underground economy. Cluck watched the data solidify into proof. The numbers did not lie, they never did. No more speculation, no more encrypted ambiguity, just cold, hard ledger entries that would burn an entire criminal organization to the ground. He moved to the primary rack and extracted the physical server drive. The metal was warm from constant processing, but his talons adjusted effortlessly to the grip. He carried it back through the service corridors, past the abandoned prep stations and silent dining floors, until he reached a reinforced nesting cavity he had prepared earlier in a hidden maintenance closet. The drive slid into place with a satisfying click. Henrietta's voice returned over the comms, already routing new protocols. She established a permanent dead-drop system, utilizing the carrier pigeon network to synchronize future operations without relying on vulnerable digital channels. Tactical data would now flow through feather and wind, secure from corporate firewalls and human interceptors alike. Decisive action was complete. The conspiracy's financial backing was documented, secured, and ready for delivery. Cluck stood in the quiet server room, the weight of irrefutable evidence resting in his talons. There were no alarms, no sudden entrances, only the steady hum of machinery and the distant murmur of a kitchen slowly returning to normal operations. The immediate consequences were already set in motion. Formal confirmation would wait for its designated slot, but the work was done. He adjusted his coat, checked his wing joints, and prepared for the extraction route. The network had been mapped. The partners were aligned. Now came the quiet walk back to the farm. The ventilation grate yielded with a metallic sigh that Cluck had meticulously timed to coincide with the kitchen's exhaust cycle. He and Henrietta moved as a single unit, sliding down the grease-slicked service chute toward the loading dock. The farmer's sudden poultry inspection had been a tactical nightmare, but their synchronized extraction through the damp drainage tunnels beneath the cobblestones proved that shared command authority transcended species barriers. By the time the heavy steel doors clanged shut behind them, the first hints of dawn were bleeding across the Muddington Acres skyline, painting the coop walls in shades of bruised purple and cold silver. The morning air carried the distant sound of tractor engines waking up, a familiar lullaby that masked their recent departure from urban warfare. The damp earth of the drainage tunnel smelled of rain and distant ambition. Cluck shook a droplet from his comb, his internal monologue maintaining the rigid cadence of a field operative debriefing after a successful extraction. They were clear. The restaurant's secure terminal had been compromised, the supply chain cross-referenced, and the encrypted manifests secured inside a tamper-proof server drive nestled against Henrietta's breast feathers. No alarms had sounded. No guards had noticed the two ordinary hens slipping away into the agricultural underbelly of the city. Cluck adjusted his posture, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle over his shoulders like a heavy winter coat. He was no longer merely a contractor following cryptic grain deliveries. He was a commander, and commanders required verified intelligence, not guesswork. Back in the coop, the air grew thick, with the scent of dry straw and concentrated suspicion. Winston emerged from behind a stack of weathered feed sacks, his dark eyes reflecting the dim glow of the battery-powered terminal Henrietta had discreetly carried through the tunnels. The pig's snout twitched as he aligned the server drive with his decryption rig, a makeshift contraption built from scavenged radio parts and an old tractor battery. Cluck observed from the highest roost, wings folded tight against his flanks. The machine hummed, emitting a low, rhythmic clicking that mirrored Henrietta's steady breathing. Minutes stretched into tactical hours as the processor whirred through layers of obfuscated code. Then, the printer spooled to life, outputting a single sheet of thermal paper covered in cascading alphanumeric codes. Winston adjusted his spectacles with a trotter and leaned forward. The decrypted data matched the original manifests perfectly. Every routing number aligned with AgriShell's shell companies. Every financial trail led directly back to the manipulator within the roost, exposing a network of neural harvesting experiments that stretched far beyond Muddington Acres. The conspiracy was no longer a shadow, it was a ledger, and every entry was traceable. Cluck descended from his perch, landing silently on the packed earth floor. He watched Winston carefully fold the paper and slide it into a sealed envelope alongside the server drive. They placed both items into the hidden nesting cavity beneath the straw, cementing their new operational framework. The alliance was no longer tentative, it was permanent. Cluck realized that his survival had never depended on solitary precision. It required coordination. Henrietta's tactical acumen complemented his own instincts, turning a chaotic farmyard into a disciplined command center. He felt a profound shift in his professional identity, moving from a lone operator navigating criminal underworlds to a field commander orchestrating a resistance. The strategic value of partnership outweighed the isolation he had once prided himself on. He noted how Henrietta stood ready beside him, her posture relaxed but alert, a silent testament to their unspoken bond. The heavy wooden door of the coop creaked open before Cluck could fully process the implications. Morning light spilled across the floorboards, revealing a figure standing in the threshold. It was a health inspector, clipboard in hand, wearing a suspiciously tailored suit that strained at the shoulders. He carried a sealed envelope that smelled faintly of expensive cigars and encrypted ink. The air in the coop grew instantly still. Cluck tilted his head, his internal monologue shifting from tactical analysis to immediate threat assessment. The mission parameters had just changed.